And we are live. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to have with me best-selling author Eric Weiner. Hi, Eric. So glad to
Hi,
have you here.
good
Good
to
to
be with you.
I know. I'm really honored and humbled to have someone of your caliber here with me. And for those who don't know Eric, he's a best-selling author and a former NPR correspondent, known for exploring life's big questions through travel and storytelling. His books include The Geography of Bliss, The Geography of Genius, and The Socrates Express. And his writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and more. Wow, exciting, Eric. So I think we're gonna talk about writing and creativity, the first thing, since we
Okay.
both share that career and passion. And your ideas are big ideas in your books, like you talk about happiness, God, and travel. And how do you do that in your books without being preachy or academic? I mean, I personally love your story
Yeah.
telling technique. So how do you do
No,
it?
that's a good question. Well, first of all, I begin my books actually with the research, not necessarily knowing that much.
Mm,
So I know the sort of standard advice that writers get is write about what you know, and I think that's actually bad advice. I think you should write about what you want to know. And so I
mm,
begin with this passion for the subject. But I come to it ignorant, basically, but a good kind of ignorance, because I'm hungry to learn about it. So I never think of myself as an expert now, but by the end of this research process, I do know a lot about the subject, whether it's happiness, spirituality, creative genius, whatever it is. But I never think of myself as an expert. In fact, I dislike the term expertise. I think expertise is antithetical to good writing.
mm,
I think the writer never really sees himself as an expert because uh, once you're an expert in something, it's kind of dead, like you know it all. We should all always be perennial students. And that's how I see myself. And the other adage that I keep in mind uh, has to do with simplicity. Um, really explaining things simply, which is not the same as dumbing it down. In fact, it's quite the opposite. A genius no less than Albert Einstein once said that if you can't explain something simply, it means you don't understand it well enough. And I really do believe that. I think if you really do understand the subject, you can explain it simply without oversimplifying it. And I aim for all of these and avoid falling into academic jargon or any kind of jargon. I think jargon is really not good for writing because whether it's medical jargon or academic jargon, any kind of jargon, just puts up a barrier between you and the reader because you're using these coded words and language. So I avoid jargon at all costs.
Hmm, interesting. What I love about your book, especially the geography, no, the geography of happiness, is that first you're very funny, and that's one. And two, you tell stories, and you explain the topics by telling stories rather than telling us, these are the countries where happiness, like the best happiest country, but you tell the story. So how did you develop this technique? And was it like trial and error? How did you become both a
Yeah.
storyteller and also a humorist?
I mean, it just came naturally because I was a journalist for NPR for a long time, and I think
Mm,
I was suppressed and repressed because as a journalist, as you generally cannot be funny, you cannot be personal, and while you do tell stories, they're often so brief you have to get to the point, or what journalists call the nut graph. What's this
yeah.
really about? In narrative, the kind of narrative nonfiction that I write. Um, you know, you want to be entertaining. Entertaining is not a four-letter word.
Yeah.
Because if you're not entertaining, you're not going to have the reader's attention. And entertaining again doesn't mean dumbing it down. It means telling stories, being funny. But humor is very tricky, Natasha. It's a little bit goes a long way, and I think humor can be used in two ways, not just in writing but in life. One is it can actually be to sort of deflect the truth. Maybe you're having a conversation with a friend, and they say something about you or something personal about you that gets a little too close to the bone, as we say, you might tell a joke to sort of just deflect
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
questioning. So
Yeah.
that's one use of humor. But another is actually to reveal truth. You think of like satire, for instance. Satire is a way of writing about the truth without getting in trouble, basically.
Yeah.
And humor can be a way of illuminating a truth, and that's what I aim for. Not funny just for funny's sake, but to kind of disarm the reader, to especially when you're dealing with heavy subjects as I do. I think humor helps because it lightens the load, if you know what I mean.
Hmm. So I want to talk about writing habits. So
Mhm.
you travel a lot. I follow
Right,
you on social media. You teach
right.
writing in Nepal and other places.
Mhm.
And what are your writing habits, especially if you're on the road? Do you actually write when you're traveling, or do you stop? What is your writing routine since you're a full-time author?
Right, right. So on the road, I'm usually doing research plus. Let me explain. So I take voluminous notes wherever I am. I'm of the belief that if you don't write it down, you're going to forget it. Especially at a certain age. So you write it down. You don't think, oh, I'll remember that idea later. You won't. So I write it
Mm.
down. But the thing about my handwriting is it's really awful. It's so awful. I was once in Cairo at a cafe, and someone looked at my notebook and said, "Oh, you can write Arabic." I said, "No, that's English." Uh, so I thought you'd appreciate that. That's how bad my handwriting is. Is my English writing is mistaken for Arabic,
Okay.
and so this is actually a good thing. Let me explain. So I take notes in my bad handwriting, but I know it has a 24 to 48 hour shelf life,
Okay.
beyond which is incomprehensible to even linguists cannot figure it out. So what do I do? Is in the evening I look at my field notes from the day and I transcribe them uh, onto my laptop. So they're preserved. But it's also a way of refining my initial observations, whether I'm in India, Ireland, wherever I am, because now I'm back in my hotel room, wherever I am, and I can think, okay, I saw that scene, and I have some questions about that. So I'll make notes to myself. I'll look into that, follow up on that. I'll ask questions. It appeared to be very old church. Was it really old? Whatever it is.
Mm.
So it's taking the notes and expanding them with questions and just preserving them before they're incomprehensible. So that's what I'm doing on the road. I tend to write when I'm back home. I'm trying to change that a bit. My philosophy has been do all the research first and then write. With my current book, which we'll get to in a little bit later, I think I'm trying to write as I go more, so that there isn't such a pressure, really. Once you've got all the research, and research, as you know, another word for research can be procrastination.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I just have to do more research, and you never get to the writing. So I try to be careful about that tendency.
Huh. I okay, so I want to talk about mindset a bit. So
Mhm.
you were an NPR, a full-time NPR journalist,
Right,
and I remember, like I've known you for I don't know almost 20 years now, and what you did back then was a bit untraditional. Is you quit your full-time job
right,
and you took this leap of faith and you
yeah.
decided to become a full-time author.
Mhm.
What made you make that decision? What kind of mindset you had to have this confidence of doing that? And obviously, it worked out. You're extremely successful. What
Yeah,
was your
it's
mindset there?
tricky because it's one thing if you have a job you hate to walk away from.
Yeah,
But I liked my job, and there are
yeah,
parts of it I loved. I was a foreign correspondent for NPR. I was based in the Middle East, in New Delhi and Tokyo. But it was not the perfect job for me. It was almost perfect and rewarding in some ways. But as I said, I felt constrained by it wasn't just NPR, the constraints of just journalism.
mm,
The deadline pressure to produce, produce, produce. You can't go that deep into any one subject. Can't be funny. Can't tell stories. Can't give your opinion about. I once went to Kabul in Afghanistan, and I produced a bunch of reports, and they were good reports. But then my friends back home wrote to me an email saying, "Oh, I heard your stories from Afghanistan. What's it really like there?" I thought, well, my story should convey what it's really like.
Mm. Okay.
And so now I try to write by so that people won't ask what's it really like in that place because that's what I'm conveying. So that's gratifying. Um, the truth, Natasha, though, is even though I think I am a successful writer. There are writers more successful than me. There are ones less successful. That's always going to be the case. I did reach more people on just a numbers basis, with one 60-second NPR report than I do with my books. But I tell myself, and I think this is true, that I'm reaching fewer people, but reaching them more deeply.
Mm.
And that is, I think, why you become a writer. You don't become a writer to reach the masses. I mean, if you do, great. If you sell millions and millions of books, fantastic. But you become a writer to reach people more deeply than is possible in other media.
Mm.
And I for a while I did sort of miss being able to say at cocktail parties I'm an NPR correspondent. That gets you some credibility in certain circles, but that's those times are gone. I don't feel the need to fly off to Rome to cover the papal conclave or do stories like that. And so I focus on deeper, more meaningful work.
Hmm. But now you can say you're a best-selling author. I think that has more cachet, I guess.
Yes, no, and that's true that once you have a best-selling book, like, no matter what happens afterwards, your tombstone will read, "Here lies best-selling author." So you've got that. But you don't wanna be a one-hit wonder either. I've written
Yeah.
5 books and I keep going, and you do it though, well, we can get to that. You do it for the love of doing it. You can't get too attached to results.
Okay. So let's say you want to advise young writers who they're okay, they have, a job. Would you advise them to do what you did? Do you tell them, okay, go all in, quit your job and write full time? Eventually you make it, it's going to be sustainable. You can, keep the lights on. Would you tell them to do what you did?
Well, do they have a spouse with health insurance is one question I would ask them. Look,
Okay.
it's not easy,
Okay.
and to some extent, in my case, you're only as good as your last book. To some extent, you have to keep producing and producing, books that sell to some extent. Um, I don't know about quitting. I would, some of my most productive time as a writer was when I was still working full time at NPR. I was living
Mm.
in Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of Washington D.C., and I would had to be at work at 9 a.m. downtown DC. I would get up at 5 a.m., go to a coffee shop across the street. I was working on the geography of bliss. I would write from like 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. and then go home, shower, and go to work. And that was some of my most productive writing. So there's such a thing as having too much free time on your hands. I would develop a writing practice as much as possible. That for a lot of people, the mornings are a good time. It's when you
Yeah.
can focus,
Yeah.
sort of before you start delving into email. That's
Yeah.
I think the big mistake that writers or any creative people make, and I fall into this trap too, is you wake up in the morning, you're like, I want to feel like I've accomplished something. So you look at your to-do list and send this email, reply to that email, and you do that and you cross it off your list. But then people reply to your reply and other things pop into your inbox. And
Yeah.
then you just let me check the news, let me check social media. Before you know it, it's noon, 1 p.m., and you haven't gotten to the creative work yet. So it's important to discipline yourself to, actually prioritize the creative work, especially if there's no editor, if you don't have a contractor, you don't have an editor saying this is due on this date, it's easy to let that slip. But that's why mornings are good because, unless you're receiving emails from overseas, your
Yeah.
inbox is going to be quiet and you can sort of feel like you're ahead of the world instead of, waking up at 10, 11 a.m. and being behind the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about 5 a.m. going to a workshop, then going to work, and then, you had, I remember you had a baby girl, back then. So you,
Yes.
you had a very busy life. So, how did you have this mindset? How did you develop this kind of fire in the belly? What makes people have it and others don't? People like I, when I coach people to write books, some of them say, "Oh, waking up at 5, I can't." What makes people do that and others don't? Since you're a philosopher, so let's philosophize
I
this.
mean, it kind of is the power of habit. I mean, habits are important. They're more than just, technical ways of they're like the engines that drive you.
Okay.
And a commitment to self. I use the Pomodoro technique, which I think we've talked about,
Yeah.
where I have, you know, um, I'll put down, say I'm working on a book, writing will be 3 Pomodoro today. And I make sure I put in those each Pomodoro is about 25 to 30 minutes of fully focused time. You're not
Okay.
you're not checking your email, you're not checking social media, you're not even getting up for a cup of coffee, you're not even going to the bathroom. You are
Yeah.
just focused on that one task, but not for that long, 25 to 30 minutes. And so your productivity is measured not necessarily in words you've produced, but in how much focused time you've put into the work. And that technique has helped me a lot. Um, and I don't know. I mean, I'm going to get philosophical here, if that's okay, but we're only on this planet for a little while. And, you know, if you're a writer, you have something to say, and you should say it. There's a saying in Judaism: if not now, when? If not me, who?
Mm.
And I think there's truth to that. You tell yourself, "I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week. I'll write that book next year. If not now, when? Someone else will write it. If not me, who?"
Yeah.
And that's powerful. And as I get older, I start to say things like, as I get older, I never said that before, but now I do. And I would say that as I get older, I'm like, okay, I've got maybe I want to write a novel. If not now, when?
Mm.
Um, and yeah, it does take some drive. And the other thing that I was sort of alluding to before is this decoupling of uh, energy and results. Here's what I mean by that. There's uh, I'll- the Bhagavad Gita is this holy poem, really, in the Hindu faith. You might be familiar with it, but there's a line there where Lord Krishna is speaking to Arjun, who's a warrior, and Krishna says in so many words, I'm paraphrasing, Arjun, put 100% effort into whatever you're doing, in this case, fighting a battle, but have 0%, precisely 0% invested in the result. And I keep coming back to that because that's hugely important. We cannot control results. We
Mm.
can't control whether a book will be published. I mean, we can to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. Certainly can't control whether a book will be successful, a bestseller, or whatever. But we can control the energy and effort we put into it. And having no expectations is not the same thing as having low expectations. Having low expectations, you're just kind of tricking yourself. Oh, this isn't going anywhere. It's low expectations is like having high expectations in disguise in a way. But
Mm.
no expectations is just I'm doing the work and I don't control the results of how it's received, which is really hard to do. We put our heart and soul into our writing, and we want people to love it, and we want people to buy our book and read our book, or at least buy our book. And so it's hard to do that. And I've had books that, yes, have been bestsellers. I've had books that have not done that well, and some of the books that have not done that well, I feel are my best writing. So
Mm.
what do you do with that? You keep going, and you keep putting 100% into what you're doing. And it's I'm talking like I do this all the time. I don't. I struggle with this. I'm
Yeah.
always. It's not easy. So
I mean, this brings me to the topic of stoicism, which you brought up in
mm,
the book about the Socrates Express,
yes,
and so stoicism and writing. And do you think? I personally think all writers should be followers of this
yeah.
philosophy. How
And
how do you? Yeah.
well, Stoicism is popular now. It's an ancient Greek philosophy, goes back to 400, 300 BC. but it's enjoying a revival. I think my theory about it is that we're living in such uncertain times. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen the next hour. When we get off this live chat, who knows what's happening in the world, right?
Okay.
Um, so people are feeling unmoored, they're feeling disconnected, they're feeling vulnerable. And Stoicism basically says, you don't control all those exterior events. You control, in fact, a lot less than you think you do, except the one thing you do control you're overlooking, and that's your internal reaction to events. You can't
Yeah.
control a crisis that happens. You can't control your reaction to the crisis.
Yeah.
You don't have to. You think, oh, a bad thing happened. Of course, I'm going to be depressed. No, you don't. That's a choice. The Stoics would say. In that
Mm.
split second, you're actually making a choice, and they try to get you to slow down so you realize, hey, I'm making a choice to be depressed or to be angry. At that person. But in fact, you can control your reactions. If someone's a jerk to you, you can't control that person being a jerk to you, but you can control how you react to their jerkiness. And
Mm.
that's an oversimplification, but that's Stoicism in a nutshell. And yeah, it is a good philosophy for writers because, again, there's so much we don't control, but we control, how we feel and think about our writing, and we control our writing. We control the craft. I mean, it's still, yes, they're editors and they're publicists and they're book packagers and all this, but basically writing is still a solitary craft. It's you and the page.
Mm.
And in a way that, for instance, television production is not. If you've ever seen how TV is produced, it's a team effort, it's a group effort. It's not this one lone artist the way writing is. So we
Mm.
you can control that.
Do you consider yourself as a stoic?
I mean, I'm a part-time Stoic, I'm a part-time Buddhist, I'm a part-time Jew. I mean, I'm a part-time agnostic. Um, so I guess yes, I'm a part-time Stoic in addition to all these other things.
Mm.
I've sort of my philosophy of religion is one should have an IKEA religion, some assembly required. Bang
Yeah.
it together.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about a bit. I mean, maybe it's not that controversial, but it's being talked a lot about, which is AI and research and writing. Uh, if you're not comfortable answering,
No,
that's
no,
fine.
no. I mean,
Okay.
go. I'm curious what your question is. I'm
My
curious.
question is, I personally feel that with the advent of AI, there is no excuse not to write a book, especially if it's a nonfiction book, because the research that AI, the deep research abilities that the AI provides, it can help you brainstorm, like themes, outlines, all of that. Do you use AI for your writing? Where do you stand on that topic?
Yeah. Okay, this is tricky. I've mixed feelings, as many writers do, I think.
Okay.
So the AI I am using is, I used to, you know, I won't say interview people because that's a journalism term. I don't use that. I meet with people and I get to know them. So I
Okay.
go and I travel and I meet with people. Like I was just in Ireland, in Scotland, researching a new book. And I would meet with people, and I can't write fast enough. We know my handwriting is terrible. So I would record them before, and then I would come back and I'd listen to the recording, and I would either transcribe it myself or hire a grad student to transcribe it. Now I use something called Otter, which I think you might be familiar with.
Yeah.
And this is all recent. This is just like a few weeks old for me. And I'm like, well, it records these meetings I have with people, and then it transcribes it, and it summarizes it so I can quickly look and see what was discussed in this meeting, and that's pretty cool. Doesn't always get like funny Irish or Jordanian accents, right? It has to learn those. And that is a research tool. I don't see that as a writing tool. That is helping me, you know, just collect information for my writing.
Yeah.
I'm more hesitant about using AI for actual writing. See, I don't like, when you're writing an email and you have your settings in such a way that it will start to predict what you might want to say. It was nice, dot, 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 seeing you the other day, whatever. It completes your thought.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's right and sometimes it's not. And that is what's it called? Predictive text, something like that.
Yeah.
Drives me crazy. I hate that. I like I'm like, no, I know what I want to say, and the danger of AI is, you know, let's talk about cliches for a second because it's connected. What makes a cliche a cliche? Well, the first person to say, you know, it's spreading like the plague cliche was a very clever thing to say. You know, it's only when it's reused and reused over and over that it becomes a cliche.
Correct. Yeah.
And what AI has in its database, as I understand it, is huge database, is a bunch of cliches because it's what's been said before. AI does not have the unexpected sentence that has never been said before, the
That's
unexpected
true.
poem. Uh, and so the danger of AI, I think, is that we become a world of cliches, you know, that
That's
the
true.
right, and you start to see this already, you know, Amazon product summaries. They're all so this boasts of 5 features, and it's always the same language, the same words, and it's smooth. So you may not think anything of it, but it's kind of a dead writing.
Mm,
AI, and it's no wonder AI is dead writing because it's written by something that's not alive, and so I worry about the dampening effect it would have on creativity. So as long as writers are still doing the actual writing and AI is like your assistant who, you know, gets you that fact and, you know, does everything but bring you a cup of coffee, does all that. So yeah, I'm for that. But um I mean, maybe I'm just old, but I think reading a book that was written by AI would creep me out and make me kind of sad, you know. And the thing is, it's going to be good, but it's not going to be great. And I don't
that's
think
true.
writers should be settling for good. We should aim for great or higher.
That's true. For me, I wanna mostly AI. I think in your case is the like the newish concept of deep research, if you're familiar with it, which is I think ChatGPT introduced it recently, where you ask it to deep research a topic and would take it like more than half an hour, and then it come back to you with all these and it scans like medical journals, it scans a massive database in a record amount of time. And I think that is the power for someone like you who depends a lot on research. And how do you actually do your research for your book?
Yeah, I hear you about that, but where does it leave room for serendipity? You know,
Mm,
like I'm researching a book now, and I was at the University of Maryland Library, and I have call numbers of books I'm interested in. I go up into these stacks, and I find the book that I wanted, but I always look adjacent, the row adjacent, the books adjacent, and often we'll find something unexpected. Like, oh, that book
and
looks really good. Let me pull that off the shelf too. You know, or you could start researching X, but take a detour to Y, and Y and Z turn out to be more interesting than X. So while yes, AI research can be very efficient, you have to ask yourself, what are you giving up? And what you might be giving up is the little detour that AI is never going to take because you asked it to research orange juice and not, you know, World War I airplanes. I don't know where that came from. And so, but maybe the World War I airplanes are more interesting. So, but it's not going to go there because you didn't ask it to do that. And, you know, also in my narrative techniques, often the research becomes part of the story. I'm walking the streets of London, going to archives, looking for information, whatever it is. That's more interesting than writing. I typed in and asked AI to find me information about whatever. So, for a lot of some writers at least, the process becomes material. The
mm,
journey. My books are in search of books. And if in search of means you don't leave your keyboard and you're just asking in a program AI program a lot of questions, that's kind of boring too. So I have some hesitancy. I go to libraries. You asked about my research. I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of academic books, so my readers don't have to because a lot of them can be very dry. And yeah, and I try to just to make. I think writers often will. Good writing is something that's unexpected but true. unexpected but true. And so that means making unusual connections. Often I think it's very satisfying to read a writer who is writing about gazpacho tomato soup, but brings in astronomy somehow, to connect it. And at first you're like, well, what does this have to do with gazpacho? And then you stay with them, and you realize, oh yeah, they connected it, right? So it's a mindset that says, I'm writing a book about cold soups from around the world. I'm not interested in astronomy. No, you're interested in anything potentially. When you're a writer and you're working on a project, you don't just have blinders on and say, no, this book is only about this.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
or
mm,
like, I'll give you another example is when I was working on Geography of Bliss, I said to my editor, I said, John, in the year I've been working on this book, and he stopped me. He said, stop right there, Eric. You've not been working on this book a year. You've been working on this book 40 years, which is how old I was at the time. Your whole life has been working on this book. And that was really helpful advice. And it freed me up and got me out of thinking, the book began when I got the contract and started working on it. No, it began when I was born. And so I started looking back into my childhood and past and mining it for material for the book. So yeah, that's helpful advice.
mm. I think I want to talk a bit about contracts and publishing and self-publishing. So, how did you get your first contract? Is it because of the fact that you were an NPR correspondent that gave you a leg up than other, like somebody who's just starting and looking for an agent and all of that? How did you?
I mean, it certainly helped, but keep in mind I had never written a book before.
Okay.
But it helped. This is before the time of really extreme social media, right? So platforms were more traditional mainstream media. Um, Being an NPR correspondent helped. Um, I think my timing was good in that the interest in the science of happiness was really just kind of the wave was cresting, and I came along with a twist on it, saying, lots of books have been written about the what and the who of happiness, but nothing's been written about the where. And that's a powerful technique, I think, when trying to sell an idea to a publisher or to an agent is, this topic is hot, but this particular angle of it has not been examined, and I'm going to examine it. Um, and so my timing was good, um, and a certain amount of luck, which is not to be underestimated, that I got not only a contract, but with a man named Jonathan Karp, who at the time was running a small imprint of Hachette called 12. And the idea was to publish only 12 books a year and to pay real attention to each release, each title, as opposed to publishing many titles a month and just seeing what sticks. So they put a lot of effort into the book and promoting it, and that helped. Um, so, and in a way, I was lucky that this was 17 years ago. I think it's harder, particularly with narrative nonfiction, to break through today, but not impossible.
Hmm. So, when you published your book, the concept of self-publishing was mostly like vanity press. Now
Right.
it completely changed with Amazon KDP, and a number of authors actually made it just self-publishing. And like for example, my understanding is Colleen Hoover started as a self-published artist, which is in the romance genre, and then it exploded. Do you think self-publishing is worth pursuing, or do you think uh,
Yeah,
writers should keep looking for that agent or that publisher, or like it can take years?
yeah, I think we're in a strange transitional state. And I think you're right. It has changed a lot. Um, you know, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, or more recently, self-publishing was a kind of dirty word
Yeah.
in that you would pay to have your book published so you can put it on your shelf and feel good about yourself. And often these were poorly produced, or there were typos or mistakes in them they were not that professional. Well, that's certainly changed. And there are self published books that are indistinguishable, both in quality of the production and in the editorial quality from a traditionally published book. They're indistinguishable. And there are ways for writers to reach readers directly. What you still have is a literary industrial complex, an industry. Let's
Yeah.
call it the which the book industry is not just publishers. It's publishers. It's reviewers. You know, most places that review books will not review self-published books, is my understanding. Then again, there are fewer and fewer places reviewing books, and
Yeah.
those book reviews matter less than they did. So, I guess I'm dodging the question here. I think there are advantages to going the traditional route, but self-publishing and hybrid publishing, which I don't know that much about to be honest, seem like a viable route, especially if you have a following or a platform already. I think
Yeah.
it's hard to start from zero.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. You have, I think, Colleen Hoover may have been self-published at first. You also have writers who are very, very successful who are deciding to then self-publish because they're like, why should I give, the
Exactly.
majority of my income to the publisher, when I'm, reaching readers directly. So you have that interesting trend. So self-publishing is either for new writers or very established ones, but not necessarily in between.
There's actually a newer trend now, which is
Okay.
why should I give money to Amazon? So people with big platforms are publishing books on their website and selling directly to readers without even using Amazon that takes a cut. And that
The question really is not, it's not publishing the book physically. That can be done in 2 weeks. It's not the writing and editing of it. It's really how do readers find the book.
Mm,
I worked with a publicist recently, and she said, Eric, no one's ever bought a book they've never heard of, and that's probably true. So, and
mm,
people always wonder, like in traditional publishing, like you submit a manuscript in 2025, and they won't publish it for a year. And people think, well, why so long? It takes that long to produce a book? No, it takes that long to gin up publicity. And it's partly the old 19th century model of publishing, 4 seasons, spring, winter, fall, and summer books. But really, it's how are people going to find your book? And if you have a built-in following either on social media or you've written books before, um, that's gold to have that base to start with. But you want to keep expanding it, right? You don't want to. It's like a politician who's only leading or governing for his base. I won't mention names, as opposed to trying to broaden his or her appeal.
yeah,
And as a writer, you want to broaden your appeal. I think without this is the tricky thing,
yeah.
broaden your appeal while still staying true to yourself. um, if you've written one book about X, you keep writing variations of that. I've taken chances with subjects, new subjects. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. So you want to grow, but not go off in such a strange direction that you lose your readers.
Hmm. So I'm actually curious about your creative flow, or how do you get yourself in that creative state where
Well,
like
you're assuming I have creative flow. Thank you.
what do you do? I mean, like the ideas of basing happiness on location, or like people who are looking for religion, or how do these ideas come from, where these ideas are born. And I've been thinking a lot about, I'm just gonna go on a bit of a spiel, is like, for me, I try to get myself in a creative flow the minute I wake up in the morning. I journal. I open the creative gates. I walk. I run. I go to the gym. I like what like this is you keep your mind receiving all the creative signals, and that's where the ideas come from. You're not gonna be creative if you're on the phone with someone. The ideas are not gonna come, right? So how do you get yourself in the creative flow to come up with these ideas?
Well, writing is a full-time job, and being creative is a full-time job, whether you're getting paid a full-time salary or not. It's not like When you're in the shower, you're writing. When you're at the
Yeah.
gym, you're writing. When you're going for a run, you're writing. In the sense that you're always thinking of ideas, and everything is potential material. Um, I'm a fan of old-fashioned paper and pen for writing down ideas. I think there's something about the physicality of it that actually, and there's studies that back
Yeah,
this
that's
up,
sure that.
that actually makes you more creative. And you want to just give your mind free rein, and not to say, oh, I'm just thinking about ideas about, a book on gazpacho again. I got gazpacho on the mind. I love gazpacho soup. So, but you want to be open. It's this openness to experience. That's like psychologists have looked at what is the one trait that creative people have more than less creative people, and it's openness to experience. Which sounds like very simple, but if you think about it, that's what's required. Are you open to what's coming at you? Are you not blocking these signals? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Open to the unexpected, and when you're showering or running or whatever, you're engaging in what's psychologists call diffused attention. So part of your attention is on the running and the walking, whatever it is, so you don't fall on your face, but enough is still freed up that you can think creatively. And that's why a
Mm-hmm.
lot of writers have been big walkers. Mark
Yeah.
Twain walked
Yeah.
15 miles through the streets of London. So I do like walking. Um, i do um, I like long airplane rides. I find I never use the Wi-Fi, and I find like the world just leaves you alone, and you can take out a notebook and think of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I keep a pretty much a running notebook of ideas, and that's your what I call the sandbox. Every writer should have at least one sandbox where you just play in, and all ideas are okay, and you're just having fun, and you doodle, you write them down, um, and the vast majority are not going to come to fruition, but that's okay. The ones that matter will stick,
Mm-hmm.
um, and you have to trust your instincts that the ideas that are right for you will stick.
So you teach writers, right? Can
I,
you
I
tell me, is
run
it,
workshops. Yeah,
yeah, workshops in Nepal, and I think one in Greece that's coming up?
yes, coming up. That's more of Classical Greece and the Art of Happiness with the Politics and Prose bookstore. Quick plug, October 31st to November 8th. And
Okay.
there I'll be talking about like the Stoic philosophy, Epicurean philosophy as we walk around Greece. I'm leaving tomorrow for a trip to Bhutan, first Nepal, then Bhutan, the Himalayan
Okay.
country, to lead a workshop with a group of writers. And it's a combination of seeing the country and writing. And look, getting away can be just a very creative jumpstart. You get away from your daily routines. Um, I don't know if there's anything magical about the energy in Bhutan. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But I think when we travel, we give ourselves permission to be different people and to think differently.
Hmm.
We lighten up. We can. It's not always the case. You can travel and be just as neurotic as you are back home, but you can. There also often there's a lightening of our load, and so when I have these writers for like 10 days in Bhutan, I mean, it's immersive. So everyone's just focused, they're away from their routines. And I think it's different from, going to a classroom once a week and with fluorescent lighting. There's value in immersing yourself and getting away.
Yeah, and you and I are hopefully going to be doing one in Jordan.
Yes,
We're
we have
working
to
on it.
move ahead with this, but it's a
Yeah.
good idea. And there's a reason the writing retreat exists to this
Yeah.
day. I mean, it's a time honored tradition of going off to a cabin. Since Henry David Thoreau and writing in the woods. Even if the cabin's only 20 minutes from your mom's house, that's okay. You need to get
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. What kind of writers join this? Like, are they working on books or
No,
journals or
it's
what?
everything. And I'll tell you, I had a couple of years ago, we had a group of doctors, uh, Asian American women doctors from suburban Maryland, suburban
Oh, wow.
Washington. They
Okay.
all knew each other, and this astounded me. These are like very accomplished women, like they're doing surgery, right? They
Okay.
have lives in their hands. But I said, okay, we're going to write. And they were terrified. They were terrified of writing.
Um,
They're okay, having someone's heart literally in their hands, but they're terrified of writing. And this always amazes me that, like, it's like public speaking is something that so many people fear. So a lot of these workshops is sort of being therapists to some extent and just getting people to just relax.
mm,
And I always tell writers that in order to write well, you have to be willing to write poorly.
mm,
And people find that comforting and reassuring, because I think the worst advice or the worst sort of message you can have in your head as a writer is, I'm going to write well. I really want to write well.
mm,
No, you don't want to write well. You want to write honestly. I think that's the gold standard. You aim for honest writing, and that's more accessible. Writing well is like, I think, a byproduct of writing honestly in a way.
yeah,
So a lot of the workshop is getting people to relax and, as I say, we all have an internal editor in our head, telling us we're no good and who do we think we are, and we need to take that editor out back and shoot it in the head and make it look like
that's not really an editor. That's like someone who's jealous and who's like trying to take you down.
Yes.
That's
Well,
how I.
envy is not. It's been said that, the seven deadly sins, envy is one of them. It's the only one that has no redeeming traits. Like, if you're lazy, at least you get to relax. But envy is a toxic
Hmm.
emotion and should be avoided.
What are you working on these days? What's your
Um,
next book about?
Yeah, I'm doing the workshop in Bhutan. I try to be a chair with more than one leg. You and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I would add to making a complete writing life is, don't only have the writing. You need to be a full person. And if it's teaching or if it's volunteering, like, be a full, complete person. It's
Mm,
not, a writer is never just a writer, because where are you going to get your material from? And also, a book is just huge. It's too huge of a project. So I try to do some, magazine writing. I might start a Substack, as everyone in the world seems to be doing, and teaching. But book wise, I am working on a new book about thin places.
mm,
And thin places, it's an old Celtic expression that in thin places, the veil between this world and the other world is thin, and you sense something else. We're also thinking of titling it The Geography of Awe, AWE. So it's about these big feelings that we get in certain places and the power
mm.
of place to sort of transform us. Um, Still, you know, thinking about how I'll structure the book and what form it'll take. I do think it's important, and this is where writing would differ from journalism. A journalist sitting down to write a story is like, okay, I know it's going to be 800 words. I know here's what it's going to say. Now then I just have to say it. I think it's important as a writer to have a destination in mind, but be willing to detour and to even change that destination.
Mm.
I've had chapters in books where I think it's this, and I'm writing it like, no, it's something completely different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you have to be willing to, not be so invested in the research you've done to, like, I can't start over now or change course. You can always change course, and you have to be willing to.
Hmm. Wow. So this been fascinating, Eric. And how can people who are like listening or watching, how can they get in touch with you? Maybe sign up for your workworkshop, buy your
Yeah.
books, all
So,
of that.
and I
Yeah.
have one coming up to Thailand also early next year in Chiang Mai,
Uh,
Thailand.
nice.
EricWeinerBooks.com, all one word. Also at Eric Weiner Books on Instagram. I'm in the usual social media places as well. And I have a more or less monthly newsletter called the Atlas of Ideas. I will not flood your inbox, don't worry, about big ideas about place. I'm really, interested in the intersection of place and ideas, and also what I'm up to and where you can find me. So,
Yeah, I like it. I'm subscribed to it. I
yeah,
read it all the time. It's fun.
right. So, should I do a Substack?
Yeah, you should.
All right, that's
Definitely.
another conversation.
That, that's a
That talk
conversation
about
for.
that's another, like, we talked about what's different from like 15 years ago or 5 years ago, having been able to build up an audience through Substack, and I see so many,
Authors
really
with authors.
established writers who are now like, instead of, pitching an editor at a top tier publication and waiting for a rejection, you know, put your ideas out there. And Substack's an interesting, and the Substack, there are other platforms as well, like Substack, I realize, and it's an interesting venue, because there seems to be a lot of good writing out there on it.
It is. I mean, you
Yeah,
have Elizabeth Gilbert, the people that I follow. You have
right,
Miranda July. Recently, James Patterson is doing live Substack. I mean, it's
right.
there's a lot happening, and as all writers should be on Substack. I think that is the
Okay.
case. And I also noticed, like my podcasts, if I put them on like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I also put them on Substack. It's like maybe 10 times more downloads I get from Substack than from other platform.
Yeah.
So
And
it's amazing.
if you don't mind a compliment, I think you're really good at navigating this world in a way that I'm not, to be honest. And I think other writers, that's why you have so many followers. It's really hard
It's
it's
hard.
not enough. It's not enough just to write well or to write
Yeah,
honestly. To write
yeah,
a good, honest book, um, and to hand it off. Even if you have, this is the thing. You think, okay, Eric has it made. He has a publishing contract. It's not what it used to be. You have to the author can't sit back. I've got to figure out that this media ecosystem, right?
yeah,
I've got to
yeah,
find ways to reach my readers. I've got to find ways to engage them, so they're going to want to read my books as well.
yeah,
And you do that really well, and you don't have any fear of this world, this brave new world. And
yeah.
so I tip my hat to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, for me, it's a mindset. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, you know what? I mean, it's when you always put like, what, they're not gonna like the article. Fine. They're not. They're gonna send me a bad comment. Fine. Like, I've been there.
Right.
Like, you
Or
know.
I guess
And
the worst thing that can happen from a writer's point of view is silence.
yeah,
That
yeah,
you don't, you're posting, and you're not getting more followers or whatever. And it comes getting philosophical here. The one word that comes up is enough. How much is enough? How much success is
mm,
enough? How many followers is enough? Um, how much exposure is enough? How much money is
it's
enough?
enough.
A friend of mine who's a life coach, um, when I was working on, I think, the Socrates Express, and I said, I hope the book is successful. She asked me a very good question. She said, Eric, what does success look like? And I keep coming back to that because it's a good question.
Mm,
What does success look like? And if it's being number one, forget it. 'Cause there's always, we're talking about writing. There's always going to be a writer or musician, whatever it is. But we're talking about writing. There's always going to be a writer more successful than you.
mm,
So, what does success look like? If you say, "Oh, it's being having a best-selling book," that's a pretty narrow
yeah,
gauge of success. And I always think, when I fling a book out into the world, because that's what you do, you fling it out there, is that if the book finds its readers, then it's successful.
mm,
And I just wrote a book called Ben and Me about my relationship with Benjamin Franklin, and I was asked this question in a podcast interview. Other than it being a bestseller, how would you say this? What makes this book a success? I said, if someone who would never pick up a book about Benjamin Franklin picks it up, reads it, and enjoys it, that would be successful. So, you know, these are different ways of measuring success than just monetary and sales
yeah,
figures. That's
yeah,
that's pretty
yeah.
narrow. And you're going to get disillusioned if you're like, success is being number one and nothing else will do. You're going to drive yourself crazy.
I think for me, success when it comes to writing, I mean, there's a success when it comes to lifestyle. Like when it comes to lifestyle, doing something that I love doing keeps me creative and allows me to like play pickleball in the middle of the day
Right.
and then able to provide for my family and
Yeah.
travel. That's for me is success.
Yeah.
But when it comes to writing, I think you completely said what I was thinking, which is the feedback that you get from your readers, and you tell you like this made like change the way I think about stuff, or this made me
Yes.
think
Yes.
about
And
how like, and when you create change just by your ideas, I
no,
think that is
those are priceless.
yeah,
when I hear from a reader and they're like, "Your book changed my life or saved my life," which
Yeah.
seems a
Yeah.
lot, but wow, um, that that is worth 10,000 hits on Twitter or whatever. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what I mean by reaching fewer people more deeply.
Yeah.
And thank God for books, though. It's still this format that allows you to go in depth, and books live. We live in a very ephemeral world where things come and go so quickly. I mean, I wrote the Geography of Bliss. It came out in 2008. That was a long time ago. We're coming up on 17, 18 years, and I still hear from readers about that book.
Yeah.
Never mind the more recent ones. So, books are the one creative form that still lasts. And I think, on this note that, the world's crazy. The world is insane. And whatever your political persuasion, we're living in a time of unprecedented change, and people feel they're sucked into the news and they can't escape it. But writers who write the kind of books that we write, and people listening here write, people need that. People are hungry for that, for something that takes them away from the news cycle, something more timeless,
Yeah.
something thoughtful, something funny, something meaningful. That's not about what happened in the last 10 minutes in Washington D.C.
Yeah.
And I that's why I have to try to block out the news. And it's easier to do in Kathmandu or in Bhutan, but I try to do it here too. And tell myself, okay, this is my contribution to the world now. I'm not a working journalist. I'm not an activist. I'm trying to bring some light into the world, and that's what writers do. We try to bring some light into what can often be a dark world. And
Yeah.
that's depressing, but hopeful
That's
maybe too.
But this, I mean, on that note, this been great, Eric. I'm not sure
Yeah,
if anyone here who joined has any questions. If anyone who's, I have like I see people online. If anyone wants to ask Eric any
sure.
question for a few minutes, if not, we can just call it a day, and I will republish this with all these the
Yeah.
insights. I personally learned a lot from this conversation, as
I could have
always.
I could have talked for another hour. So
Me
there we
too.
go. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Okay.
And so for anyone who joined us today, thank you very much. And
Yes.
for anyone who's watching the recording, please feel free to reach out to Eric, buy his books. I vouch for them; they're amazing. And
Thank you.
so thank you for joining us. And Eric, thank you so much. And I wish you the best of luck. And I'll see you soon.
Chipron. Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Take care.
You too. Bye.